Okay, it's in progress. Good morning. Welcome to all of you who have joined us this morning. And this is the second part of the talk on lions by Ravi. Ravi, I'm told, will also be taking us through a very short, briefly on what he had spoken about the last time to give it context. And if any of you or if all of you had read and gone through the Supreme Court order, you would have found that that one part of the order insisted that Dr. Ravi Chellam be on the committee and as a scientific expert. So what we are going to hear today is straight from the horse's mouth. Sorry, from the lion's mouth. So over to you, Ravi. Yeah.
Thanks, Vijay. Good morning to everyone. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. I'm not going to do much of a recap of the talk of 2 weeks ago, but what I will try and do is at least show some pictures for those who did not attend to get a sense of the animals that we are talking about. But the primary focus of today's talk is going to be on what is conservation, how do we approach conservation in India, and in the specific context of lions, what are the issues that are there and how I think they need to be dealt with. So, as I outlined in the last talk, these are not your open habitat lions, these are forest animals. And when you look at it, it's not easy to differentiate between an African and an Asian lion. There are a few characteristics, but these are not diagnosed. On an average, their group size seems to be smaller than in Africa, tending to be for males under 2. Males and females are actually two distinct parts of the society. The females often living in a cohesive group, generation after generation. Male coalitions coming for short periods of anything from 2 to 5 years maximum. And the male's life revolves around holding territory to gain access to females and then to be able to breed with them and pass their genes to the next generation. That really is the main motivation of the life. Females, it's really about their own survival to begin with, and then to be able to take care and ensure that the cubs that they give birth to are growing up to be adults. And observed very interestingly that males during times of food shortage are tolerant of their cubs than females. And the explanation is males have short periods of time. They know that the cubs carry their genes, so they're willing to accommodate. While from a female's perspective, they can give birth to multiple litters, and they know that if they do not survive, the cubs don't have a chance. So they first try and make sure they survive, and then this is in times of shortage I'm talking about, not for normal times. We also went through what the characteristics of a large cat are. They're typically above, almost completely carnivorous. They will occasionally take vegetable matter, but not to kind of provide some roughage, and if they have worms and so on and so forth. They're very wide-ranging, and when we talk of wide-ranging, we talk of tens of square kilometers. Lions and tigers and snow leopards having very, very high densities in which they live. Lions in certain parts of Africa have home ranges of more than 400 square kilometers. This is the Kalahari region where prey is low density. All large cats are territorial, and all large cats also have ability to grow. And the lions evolved in the savannas of Africa. They are the only social cat. In the sense that their basic unit is more than one. Unlike in a tiger or a leopard or a snow leopard, where they are solitary cats, and the only you see them in larger groups is when males and females come together to mate, or when a female is bringing up. Lions evolved in the savannas of Africa, used to live almost throughout this African continent, but for the Sahara Desert, from the Atlas Mountains all the way to Cape of Kuno, so that's the extreme north to the extreme south, through an extremely diverse set of habitats, including rainforest and deserts. So you can see it's an extremely adaptable animal, as much as the leopard is, as much as the tiger. And the tiger, we know, lives from the steaming hot rainforest of Indonesia all the way to Siberia. And that gives you a sense of, including Sundarban's mangrove, which is semi-aquatic population of tigers. Leopards actually span two continents, both Asia and Africa, again living through a very, very wide variety of habitats, often living with a larger predator, a tiger or a lion. There's very, very next to no overlap between snow leopards and common leopards. Lions used to live through much of north and central India. For some reason, they never came south of the Narmada River. And it's primarily due to hunting that their population very nearly disappeared, went extinct. And if you look at the map of India there, you can see how much distribution they had. And this is, of course, not a complete data. This is based on observations of naturalists and shikar observations. People were whenever they shot lions. But even that, as far east as Bihar, as far north as Punjab and Haryana, and as far west as Gujarat and Rajasthan, going into what is today's Pakistan, Iran. So the lions came from Africa and through a process naturally dispersed, occupied this extensive habitat. The only protected area we have today in India for the lions in Asia is Wildlife Sanctuary and National Park, the central dark surrounding light green is the Wildlife Sanctuary. They've since added some 40 kilometers here and 20 kilometers there and so on. So the whole conservation unit is something in the region of 1800 to 1900 square kilometers. These are relatively separate units, but from an ecological and probably conservation perspective, we need to look all of this together as the Deer Protected. And you can also see that there are several roads, there are three railway lines cutting through north-south primarily across this protected area. You'll also notice how much interface there is between human habitation and the protected area. It is not your smooth circular or rectangular kind of boundaries, but it's a wavy kind of boundary. In India, our protected areas are more by default. We don't plan our protected areas. We just say whatever is left to some extent. And also historically, a lot of this has been the hunting grounds of the local Maharaja, nobility, and so on. And that is the way our protected areas have been created. Just a few more pictures before we move on to subject. We also talked about how they very nearly went extinct. Please don't pay too much attention to the accuracy of these numbers. I think we just need to look at trends. Let us say these are around 1880 to 1910. There were about 50 animals or less than 50 animals. And then you had a remarkable the story of the lions is a story of success. From this close brush to extinction, today's estimated population in the region of 600 to 800 animals is, by any yardstick, a stupendous success. Especially in a country like India, which is a developing country, which is high human density, land is scarce, per capita income is low, people still dependent on land and biomass for their living. To have this number of lions, of which about 50%, that is about 300 to 400 of them, not even within the area, but outside, living in small patches of reserve forests, forest plantations, agricultural land, and essentially human dominated habitat, is something that the world admires. Even within the wildlife sanctuary, lions live with the local pastoralists called Maldaris. They primarily raise buffaloes for a living, and these are the kind of rudimentary settlements in which they. We talk about lions living outside. Here is a good example of the Gir PA here, the protected area, and you have lions here in Girnar Wildlife Sanctuary, the coast forest, in these little patches in Bhavnagar. And there are maps that give you a better close and zoomed in view of these forest patches. Doesn't mean the lines restrict themselves to those patches. That's just their refuge, and they move out wherever they need to move, either because some other line is displacing it, or they're trying to go out and get uh, prey for themselves. So this is today's conservation scenario. Please also keep in mind this little patch of forest in Porbandar district called Bhadra Wildlife Sanctuary. We will come to that in a while. So what am I saying? Burda, not Bhadra. Bhadra is in Karnataka. Bhadra Wildlife Sanctuary. And this is from the last census, 2015. This May, earlier this month, the census was scheduled, but for obvious reasons. So you see that according to official numbers themselves, about 300 lines are within the protected area, the balance are outside. Have numbers for each of these subpopulations. So in 18 square kilometers, 8 lines living. That doesn't mean they're restricted to the 18 square kilometers. That is the size of the wildlife sanctuary. These 8 lines probably need 200 square kilometers. So the bulk of their home range is outside these more protected areas. And you also notice this little spot of yellow there, and you see the legend. This is in September, October 2018. The numbers are disputed, but I think more than 30 lines died due to canine system providers. We'll get to that again. But this is to basically say, while this is the core for conservation, and it holds about 300 lines, nearly an equal number of lines are outside. And the only significant patch of protected forest outside is Girnar Wildlife Sanctuary. And the rest of it, which holds about 33 lines, the other 250 odd lines are essentially living in human dominated habitats. Told you about railway tracks going through. Here is a picture of a line crossing one. This is close to Sasan, the path of Portals, and just a tutorial side of things. Right feeding on cheetal. 35% of their diet is livestock. Lines within the park and lines outside the park are completely different in the manner in which lines outside the park interactions with people. Pictures from the mid 80s when I was doing my fieldwork. The one on the right is me. The one on the left is Dr. A.J.T. Johnson, the first trained wildlife biologist who was my PhD supervisor. Lines we radio call or tranquilized to radio call. I mean, this is my field crew. So that's kind of by way of a quick introduction. I hope I didn't take too much over that. But this is really the crux of the issue. I think all of us have some notion of what conservation is. I don't know whether we actually quite discuss and debate what it is and whether we have a collective understanding of what. I struggle with it almost on a daily basis. I think over the last 3-4 decades that I've been involved, there is increasing understanding. But very often, almost I would say every few months, there are certain situations which challenge my understanding and views on what conservation is. Is conservation about individual animals? Is conservation about populations of animals? Is it about habitats of animals? What time frames should we plan conservation? What about rights of people? Where is justice in all of this? How inclusive is our model of conservation? Are there costs to conservation? Who bears these costs? Who reaps the benefits? So these are all questions because as conservation groups, as scientists, we all have opinions, we express opinions, we write about it, we lobby, we advocate, we try and influence government policy, but each of these actions needs to go through some level of this kind of questioning to at least, I mean, we might not necessarily have the answers, but we should try and answer this and more to see where we are coming from, what can be the implications of what we are proposing. I will obviously want to take questions on this, but I think Vijay feels it's better that I speak and take questions at the end. So please, as and when you feel any questions coming up, just put it on the chat box and come to it. But I will, in my limited view, try and answer these questions. Conservation is definitely not about individual animals because that is more animal welfare. I'm not saying animal welfare and conservation don't go together, but we should not delude, not able to hear. Ramesh, can you hear me now? And others here? Others are able to hear Ramesh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Oh, okay. Fine.
What happens to me is when you move up and down, no, is when we lose you.
Okay. Okay. So I will try and hold this. It is definitely not about individuals because the only guarantee for individuals like you, me, our parents, our children, grandchildren is death. The only guarantee when you're born, we know for sure is we will all die. What happens between birth and death is somewhat in our hands, somewhat in the hands of the people who bring us up, educate us, the company we keep, and the environment in which we live in. But there are only two guarantees in the lives of any individual. Once you're born, you will die. And that works for all other organisms. Lifespans vary. Some organisms last a few minutes, some a few hours, some a few days. And of course, the giant trees last multiple centuries. So it cannot be about individuals. Conservation is definitely about persistence of populations. But for populations to persist, you need habitats. I mean, you and me can build houses, multi-story houses. We can air condition them, we can heat them, we can pipe in water. But wildlife and nature don't have that luxury. Wildlife cannot live beyond a certain density, and that applies even to plants. They need proper habitats, and plants especially because they are not mobile. They really need the right kind of habitat to root themselves, sprout, and then live their lives. For animals, they will need several patches of habitat which meets various needs of their life. So conservation really is about integrity, persistence of habitats, which will then allow populations to persist. So we should be very clear about this and not get very excited about the fate of individual animals. Which is not to say that we should not worry about when animals die due to human causes. That's a slightly different because that will come to undermine the ability of populations to persist. Now, what are the time frames we need to work? We cannot work for conservation in hours, days, months, years. It has to be in the frame of a few decades. Typically, when we plan, when we model, we talk of at least 50 years and try and give a longer term view of 100 years. This might sound ridiculous. All of us in our professional lives normally have about 30 years of paid service and 35 years of paid service and maybe 10, 15 years, or maybe with like 20 years after retirement, we might continue to, do our work. But for conservation, it has to be in that time frame because we need to look through multiple generations of animals. And that's the way you can ensure persistence of populations. I strongly believe, and I might be a bit of a minority, not just in Indian conservation, but in international conservation. If conservation has to succeed, it has to be just, it has to be inclusive, and we really need to think through about the costs of conservation and who's bearing the cost of conservation. I would like to think that all of us today have seldom gone hungry to bed. We don't have to worry about a roof over our heads. But very often, when we make recommendations, we affect the lives of people who are not very sure about their next meal or be sure about a roof over their head. And that, I think, is completely unacceptable. especially when in today's India, you have laws which protect the rights of these people. So I would always like to phrase any conservation action within the legal framework. We cannot pick and choose. We cannot say I like one law, I don't like another law. That does not behoove of a rule-abiding society, and that's a serious problem today in India. I'm sorry if you think it is moving away from the topic, but uh, the law and order situation of a country often reflects on how well it does conservation. You can have the army. Nepal did have the army for many years, many decades, protecting Chitwan. There was a change of government. There was a rise of some terrorist within quotes activities. Then what happened? The entire protection got dismantled. The local people who felt completely wronged by that model of conservation just vented their anger on the protected area. So decades of conservation achievement went down the drain. So these are questions that I think we just need to be thinking about. So getting specifically to conservation of lands, told right at the beginning that conservation a huge success for the lions, had from an estimated number of less than 50 animals to the park is full of lions, the protected area, and 50% or more of the population are outside. So the question we really are grappling with is how do we manage success? Even success needs management. And that is where I feel the state government of Gujarat and to some extent the government of India have lost the plot. Going back as early as 1952, or probably 1950, I might be, I'm not sure whether it was 1950 or 52, in the first meeting of what was then called the Indian Board for Wildlife, K.S. Dharmakumar Sanjeev, who is from the royal family of Bhavnagar, proposed that a second population of lions should be established because having a single population of lions is too risky. So that is what, 70 years ago. That is when the population was less than 200 animals. Okay? And this was followed up by two females and one male being put in a train carriage and taken by train from Junagadh to Varanasi, and then it was released in a small place called Chandraprabha, close to Varanasi. This little experiment did succeed. Three animals grew to be 11. And because at that point of time, the concepts and understanding of wildlife ecology and management were rather rudimentary, uh, unfortunately, there wasn't sufficient protection afforded, and the place was too small. Lions probably went out, hunted livestock. And those days, it was quite okay for the Zamindas to shoot any animal which was endangering their life or their livestock. So the only report we have by a person, a forest officer called A.S. Negi, concludes by saying the lions grew from 3 to 11 and then they disappeared. So in Africa, lions, leopards, rhinos, giraffes, buffaloes, I mean, name it, cheetahs, they move animals, at least 10,000 large mammals every year. That's primarily both from a conservation angle and also from a tourism angle. They have special aircrafts, not with passenger seats, but with ability to take animal cages and so on and so forth. So translocation is not rocket science. Um, Capture, movement of animals. There are specific protocols to be followed for each species, and we know it can work. So my PhD work was commissioned by the Wildlife Institute of India. I joined them in October 85. I was sent to Gir in December 85 to start my field work. And the whole idea was get us the latest on the ecology of the animal to try and inform whether translocation is possible, and if it's possible, how should we go about it? So this is the place we chose. I finished my field work in March of 90 and took my own sweet time to write up my thesis, and then in 93 went out to survey potential sites which we can consider for translocation. Based on that survey, the Kuno Parkour Wildlife Sanctuary in Madhya Pradesh, bordering Rajasthan, was chosen. It was a forest tract of 3,800 square kilometers. It had perennial water. This is the Kuno River, which is tributary to the Chambal. So, very, very well-drained area, extensive forest. But the problem was diverse forest. You saw the riverine track, you see the bamboo forest here, very productive grassland. So that diversity, and we could see that it had chinkara, chausinga, nilgai, cheetal, sambar. It had a very diverse prey assemblage: wild pigs, langur, porcupines, and so. But at that point of time, there were more than 25 villages, extensive livestock grazing, so that it meant, and there was quite a bit of poaching. So the wild prey, though diverse and present, the number was very low. So we recommended that a central area of roughly 800 square kilometers, free of human habitation, and that becomes the core for management, and then introducing lions. So this was all, the surveys for this site were done 93, 94. So we had more than 1 year across seasons data. I presented this to the Ministry of Environment on 25th January 1995. It had a meeting had the then Secretary Ministry, Mr. N.R. Krishnan, the Chief Wildlife Warden of Gujarat, the Chief Wildlife Warden of other officials of the ministry, and the Director of the Wildlife Institute of India. And by 1st April 95, budgets had been allotted to Madhya Pradesh to manage. So things were going pretty quickly, and I felt very happy that in my own small way I was contributing to something significant. But unfortunately, even prior to this, but most definitely after this meeting, things got, for want of a better word, politicized. Now, the Gujarat Assembly, and in Gujarat, it doesn't matter which political it comes to lion translocation, unanimity. They even passed a resolution in the state assembly saying that it's a very weirdly worded resolution. It says no lions will be allowed to leave Gujarat. Something for conservation, one male, one female, and sub cubs would be given, or something to that effect. So I don't think they have clarity on what they say. And also, lions by themselves have moved into Diu, which is a union territory, and it's not part of Gujarat also. So lions are not necessarily taking government permission as to where to move. They have made it an emotional issue, calling it this is the pride of Gujarat. I don't know whether they had the fact that a group of lions are also called the pride when they use that term. But they've said that if lions leave Gujarat, the pride of Gujaratis would be dented. There has been an atmosphere of fear. There has been no ability to have an open and informed discussion or debate over such issues. What is good for the lions is never brought up. It is all phrased in things like, oh, it is our culture. And in fact, I read some fantastic submissions to the Supreme Court. One, it was saying like, which self-respecting family will allow its children to be thrown out of its home or something like that, saying that if you allow lions to be translocated, it's like a family throwing its children out. They presented again very flawed ecological arguments, like saying the average temperature of Kuno is 1 degree more than that of so they will die of heat stroke, not knowing lions are extremely adaptable. And there was no attempt at engaging with facts. And I would say there's been a collective failure. Definitely Gujarat Forest Department, but to some extent Madhya Pradesh Forest. But all of this is history. Because on the 15th of April, my own involvement. In February 2012, I got a call. Ravi, the forest bench of the Supreme Court has decided to hear the lion transfer. I would like you to serve as an expert witness. Are you willing? Came out of the blue. I'm based in Bangalore. I had kind of lost touch with the case because I didn't file the case earlier on. Some papers came to me for review and expert inputs, so I used to give them. Ritvik Datta was the one of the advocates handling the case. He's the one who contacted. So I said yes, but the challenge was I had to go to Delhi every week, and that had to come out of my pocket. There was nobody paying for my travel. It was lucky I had friends in Delhi with whom I could stay, but it was a hectic engagement from February till about May of 2012. Sometimes once a week, sometimes twice a week. On Monday, they will say, okay, next hearing coming Friday. So I will book tickets for the following Monday, which I cancel. I mean, it was all crazy, but it was very, very useful. I got, for the first time, a real view as to how the court operates, how the lawyers operate. It is what shall I say, organized chaos, if you know what I mean. People are pushing and jostling, even in the Supreme Court. Uh, you, you and the judges recognize my presence every after the first 2, 3 hearings when they started asking me to give written inputs. They would greet me when I went there. They would, before rising, acknowledge my presence, and I'm very grateful. They, in their judgment, has also mentioned my name and so on and so forth. So, forget the money that I spent going up and down. There is, to that extent, satisfaction that my role was recognized. But even more important was the judgment itself. It is a very, very nuanced, well-informed, far-reaching judgment. But the tragedy is, I don't think anybody in the government has even read it properly. I don't think there's anything tangible that's come out of it. Forget the line constitution. Uh, there's the cheetah complication, which the Supreme Court itself has now opened the window slightly. And there are a couple of other issues we will come to. So 15th April 2013, the order is passed. It says within 6 months, the lines need to move. It bases its judgment on 2 articles of the Indian Constitution. It talks very strongly of the role of the National Board for Wildlife, which incidentally hasn't met since 2014. So that gives you a sense of how much importance wildlife is getting under the current dispensation. That the full board, the National Wildlife Board, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, has not met once since 2014. It goes to the Wildlife Action Plan and says line transportation is one of the selected priority actions and why it should be done. And it basically punctures holes in all the arguments that Gujarat is giving, saying no state, organization, or person can claim ownership or possession over wild animals in the forest. This is a national and international heritage, and no particular political body should claim ownership over it. So that's these are all exact words from the judgment. It talks about ecological environmental security, and that goes also against the popular narrative about how development is important, especially now in the post building that we need to be. And it says the only approach to conservation should be what is best. The other argument is noise. So, preservation of an endangered species, I don't like the word preservation, it should be conservation, for which we have. And for all of us, it's very, very clear that having all your eggs in one basket, which is having all the lions in and around you, is not in the best interest of the species. And it came down heavily on the ministry for planning to introduce African cheetahs because, what is the conservation argument there and how resources, conservation resources which are scarce, would get diverted into this rather than the lion. And also it came about because Gujarat took the position that cheetahs are weaker than the lions, and the WIA plan had suggested that cheetahs should be first translocated or introduced rather, and you should give it time for that population to establish itself before the lions can be released. So Gujarat very conveniently took the position, let the cheetahs come and settle down, after which we will take a decision about lion reintroduction. it even recommended that a parliamentary legislation for the preservation and protection of endangered species, so that recovery programs. So they were going beyond lions, that they're using lion as a model. They recognizing the fact there are many species in India which are endangered, which need recovery programs, and we can, we all recognize what these species are. So we have the Wildlife Protection Act, we have the Biodiversity Act. There is really nothing which talks about recovery program for any species. So the judgment came in April 2013. There, one of the recommendations was setting up of the expert committee. Jayanti Natarajan was then the minister. Till about July, they didn't take any action. So I was getting a little angsty, but finally in July they set up the meeting. Two meetings of the committee took place, but Gujarat came to these meetings only with objections. They even went to court with what's called as a review petition and a curative petition. Both of those were set aside by the Supreme Court. So from August of 2013, the position is very clear. The original judgment of April 2013 stands. We've since been to Kuno multiple times. The villages have been removed. 1,543 families were moved. Radius has come up tremendously. Management capacity has increased. And then what happened was in 2016, I think, public citizen went to court saying, the court said 6 months, it's more than 3 years, there's no sign of transportation. But our wheels of justice grind slowly. This came up for hearing only in November 2017. It had a couple of hearings, and then in March 2018, the government talked it very easily, basically by saying that we are holding meetings. Those meetings have not been held. Fundamentally, we are in a state. Subsequently, in September, October 2019, there was a significant number of line deaths. The government itself has identified canine distemper virus. There are now, starting from January again, fairly pronounced mortalities, and that is being told due to disease called babesiosis. And when babesiosis and CDV act together, it can be deadly. In 1994, such an infection took place in the Serengeti population, which is about 3,000 animals spread over 25,000 square kilometers. And in a matter of weeks, 75% of the lions got infected, and 1,000 lions died. We just cannot afford that kind of mortality. We've been escaping one such incident after the other, but we are tempting fate by not setting up a second free-ranging population. What it does is geographical isolation, what in terms of talk of as social distancing or physical distancing. There'll be one other population which is about 1,000 kilometers away. Even if the real population faces any problem, it's very unlikely that the same set of problems will occur in Kuno or vice versa. And this population is surplus. And even if it is not surplus, I would still be talking about the value of transportation, setting up second, third, fourth, fifth population, because in many ways it is about correcting the wrong we as humans have done, which has caused a local extension to much of its distribution in the country. So, just a few slides to conclude. Many of you would have read, seen these pictures. I mean, this is, you can see the leopard there, right? It's amongst the vegetation. Here it is kind of dropping down, and people are taking rules, laws into their hands. I mean, our conservation model has been, we have to move people away from wildlife for wildlife to succeed. So people are then saying, why is wildlife coming into our homes? And certain animals, definitely like leopards and snakes, feel persecuted much more than others. But even in this mess, you still see a certain reverence. I mean, yes, the leopard is dead, but here you have the group there gardening it. You know, that cultural link is still there, and I think that's the only reason there's that level of tolerance and acceptance for large mammals outside of protected area. This is something we need to cherish. This is something we need to celebrate. This is something that we actually need to, at some level, make it the foundation for our conservation. Not merely saying people and wildlife cannot go together. If people and wildlife cannot go together, we will not see scenes like this. This is within the protected area. You see a groups on WhatsApp. The government, in the name of development, after throwing people out, is allowing oil drilling, boats and canals and no, name it. Anything is allowed in the name of development, but local people cannot. So there is this complete uh, hypocrisy in how we try and push a conservation agenda. I think we need to approach this much more carefully. We need to call out bad behavior. The time for remaining silent, I think, is long. Okay, just I think last few slides. I mean, this will sound repetitive, so I won't. This is my first line picture. That's the only important thing. We're doing field work. It's about the line sleeping. Let my camera go turn back. My shadow again. There's a line. I mean, these are just fantastic. I was young. I was a bit young then, but it also allows this kind of access, which I think is again something very, very unique. I'm really mad to have done the kind of thing. I can't understand how people can work with. Okay, so I'm done, Vijay. So we can move to the questions. I already see some there.
Yeah.
Uh,
So,
so,
like Ravi had said, you could your comments, your questions, everything can go into the chat box, and Ravi will, attempt to answer them one by one. Yeah. And just I had seen a question asking where the Supreme Court judgment was, but Ravi had actually circulated it, and I had posted it on the Google group. The Supreme Court judgment, the entire judgment is available on our Google.
Yeah, I put it also on the WhatsApp group, so it's both on the WhatsApp as well as.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, Ravi.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Anthropocentric rights versus rights of humans. How does one sort this dilemma? Ambika, I don't see the dilemma at all. If I think what is right and what is wrong needs to be clear. Willful, wanton destruction of other forms of life cannot be justified with the argument that this is anthropocentric rights. As Gandhiji very famously said, nature can meet our needs. It can never fulfill our need. And you don't even have to go across species. Look at the fate of majority of Indians. They struggle to get 3 square meals a day and clean drinking water. And that has nothing to do with nature not giving us enough. It is the manner in which we develop and the falsehoods that are sold to us in the name of, for instance, national security. If people can't get adequate food, clean drinking water, proper sanitation, education, and healthcare, what national security are we talking about? Look at our budgets. Where is the money going? So I don't think we should view this as human rights versus rights of nature. I think we need to recognize that nature is the foundation for human life. And if nature is disturbed, destroyed, and degraded beyond limits, there's a cost to pay. And in many ways, COVID-19 is a good example of that. We today celebrate the fact that we have clean air. Is that something to celebrate? Shouldn't that be the norm? Shouldn't that be what you should expect? I mean, clean air comes for free. Nature does not give you polluted air. It is we who pollute. So I think we need to view, I mean, we are all functioning. I mean, we are not taking flights. Most of our work gets done. So I think we need to rethink how we want to live on this earth. And unless we do that and we advocate more sustainable models, I don't think there is a way ahead. And that includes tough questions like how many children should we have? Should we have children? One is the absolute number of people. The other is the consumption that we indulge in. Unless these two questions are addressed at each individual level, I don't see a bright future. Ambika, I don't know whether you're satisfied with that answer. If you can unmute yourself or message me, I'm happy to take a follow-up.
Yeah, hi Ravi. I actually was meaning it the other way, in the sense that we tend to look at everything as how it works for us, whereas actually we should be looking at the rights of non-human things as well. That's what I meant.
Okay. So,
yeah, so I'm in agreement with you. Yes.
No, in that sense, even that is what works for you. I mean, having clean air has become a luxury now. Having clean water has become a luxury now. So
Yeah.
if we deal with nature in the right way, those would become the norm.
Yes.
Those should be the norm.
Yeah, right. I'm in agreement with you.
Thanks. Vasant, does government compensate villages for cattle kill? Yes, but not at market rates. It is a bit complicated. They have to establish that the lions that they were in the region in which they're allowed to graze, that they were not out at night. They have to get a forest official to come and inspect the site within 24, 48 hours, something like that. And they often get in the range of 20, 25% of market value. But the Maldaris don't quite object to it, but the villagers around have a problem. The Maldaris are much more attuned to the ways of the lions and more accepting of that mortality. But the villagers around are much more of a problem. I mean, you can't blame them. They are not living in the sanctuary. They are living and trying to pursue their livelihoods. So, in 2 weeks ago, I did show some videos of the manner in which these lions are moving around villages and towns around here. Is so towards lion conservation. So far, it's quite remarkable how accepting Gujaratis are, local people. But if somebody loses 5 or 6 milking animals in a short span of time, their attitude will change. Because in a herd, they might have 10 or 12 animals which is yielding, and if 50% of that gets taken, obviously that means penury for them. So it really depends on the context. And if people get attacked, that's a slightly more different thing. But normally, the number of attacks on people is much lower, very, very low. So it is not an issue. With the same party incentive, shouldn't the transportation move faster? Oh, I wish. We've had the same party in the center for 2014, the same party in both Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat for a very long time. But we also have the same person who was the chief minister of Gujarat now as the prime minister of India. And I don't think he's quite grown out of that. I mean, it's about, it's when some people in their political rhetoric talk about the size of their chest, there is a problem. And these are not people who are capable of accepting that they have done mistakes or they were wrong earlier. So there is really no room for dialogue here, but it is all beyond shouting. The Supreme Court passed a judgment. Are we a law-abiding society? Are we rule-bound? Why isn't the judgment? For everything else, we talk about rule of law. Why is rule of law not applying here? Why is the contempt petition so easily dismissed? So, I mean, each of us need to, as citizens of this country, we need to question this. Ask these questions. Make it part of a daily discourse. I mean, I'm pushing it because it's lines, but it has implications for everything else. The manner in which environment is the manner in which boundaries of protected areas are changed, the manner in which huge scams like what I see, this whole money collection supposedly to aid the COVID relief is going on. So it's all linked. It will sound political, but the manner, our lives are political, and conservation is an act of politics. It is a very deliberate act that all of us do. So I don't think we can remove politics here. But to me, I keep going back to the fact there is a standing judgment of the Supreme Court, and we should keep asking the Supreme Court and government of India to comply. Whether it is A party or B party is a matter of detail. And that should not, it is the Supreme Court of India, it's not a High Court that is. Vasant, does that satisfy?
Yeah, correct, you're right. But the problem that the National Board of Wildlife has not met since 2014 is real news and shocking.
Shouldn't we be asking these questions? Shouldn't this be a headline in the newspaper? I mean, today's Sunday magazine of the Hindu has a lovely headline: "The Ministry of Environment Clearance." I mean, that's the article based on the clearances given during the pandemic. It's primarily focused on the Dibang Valley. The MNS visited Assam this year, and we saw for also such a probably same state. Yes, there is a rhino story there, which was like typically the NTB rescue carried out by state commandos, in the sense that when was it? Probably sometime in the 80s, I think. There was a move to translocate lines to Dudhwa. Dudhwa is in Uttar Pradesh, in the Terai area. And Assam then was politically charged, and they basically said rhino is Assam's pride, we will not give it outside of Assam. But the government of India, right or wrong, was hell-bent on this. They got military transport planes, and through the night moved rhinos into the plane and flew it out into, I think, Delhi or Lucknow, from where the rhinos were taken by road. So rhinos were moved out of Assam, but again, from a political point of view, at that point in time, central government was Congress, the state government was Congress. So there was, and those were the days when, I suppose even today, the Prime Minister had a lot of say. The Prime Minister wanted something, things did get done. I agree, but then there are also rhinos in, I think, Jaldapara, West Bengal. Some of it might actually be prior populations. I don't think, like Gir, rhinos were ever restricted to a single site, as like Kaziranga. I think there were always some relict population more than one or two other places in Assam and as well as Jaldapara and West Bengal. Is the judgment available? How do you think that can be done? What is the Bharati, my view on this is, I don't think you should just pick the lion story. I think the story to be picked is where are we with our environment as a whole and wildlife in particular. So that really is the question to ask. The broader development story, how we are suffering as citizens of this country from all that is happening, and really opposing any further fragmentation, degradation of any protected area. All they will give you is it will cost a few crores more. So be it. Projects cost overrun as a norm. Some projects they will estimate 3,000 crores. By the time it finishes at 6,000 crores. So if it has to take a detour of 30 kilometers, it has to take a detour of 30 kilometers. So this is all just a game they play. We just have to call it out. We need to do some research. There are various groups doing this research. It has to become part of first personal conversations, then larger conversations before we can push it to a national debate. But this needs to come up front in the manner in which, while it's interesting to identify species, talk about observations we have, the little clips we make, and so on. If the broader question remains unaddressed, what we don't realize is the very foundations are being eaten away, and they're being eaten away in a very, very quick speed. And that, like any protest, will need numbers, will need informed action. And wherever we have influence, we at least have to keep talking, whether it has an impact, whether people change their views. But this has to become part of our daily conversation. How to mobilize an inherent, how to mobilize any conflict. Oh, celebrate it. All means, I mean, I think each of us have stories. I think we're all mean, none of us is young, or at least speaking for myself, I'm not very young. But if there are elders in our families, we need to talk, especially people who still live in rural, semi-rural areas. All of this needs to be documented, celebrated, and alternative forms of conservation needs to be thought about seriously. A country as large, diverse as India cannot have one model of conservation. Uh, a model of conservation for a fern is going to be different from that of another. So, that diversity is what we need to do. And if we give credit, I mean, the government can't keep taking credit for everything. I think there is a role for government, but more importantly, in a country like India, I think the role of the local people and cultural attitudes and the special relationships we enjoy with nature has to be something that really needs to be addressed upfront, documented, and celebrated. And if you give it back to the people saying, we're thankful, we're grateful, we learn from what you say, this is the role that you have, that only reinforces their attitude, and then the next generation and the generation after, that kind of values will persist. Otherwise, they're constantly being told as to how they are the problem, and they don't see any value in continuing that way of life. I think that's the chat questions. I just got one. Okay, just okay.
It was a comment, yeah. So I think the questions are all done, Ravi. And is there any more?
Vijay,
Yeah.
I was remembering our trip to Gir, if you remember.
Yeah. No,
Wonderful time we had.
I know. It was amazing. And it was so beautiful that we also saw 4 leopards during that trip, Ravi.
Oh yeah, fantastic for leopards. I've seen one adult female with 4 fully grown cubs. I've seen lions chasing leopards, leopards killing various prey animals. And most leopards, I think, for me, were during the day. I think they were adjusting the space use because lions were using the darker hours. The leopards were primarily active during the day.
I just have one question about this. When I read that Supreme Court judgment, I mean, or rather the objections of the Gujarat government about the resident tiger population in Madhya Pradesh. So, I mean, what happens when there are two predators? I mean, if you just elaborate on that, Ravi, if you have time.
Yeah. I think if you, I'm trying to. If you look at this map, lions historically have overlapped with tigers. So we can only do a bit of guesswork here, informed guesswork. Ecologically, lions and tigers vary on a few points. Tigers love cover. Lions are fine with open habitats. Lions have the ability to tolerate heat and dryness uh, much more than what a tiger will be able to. So you see that in any landscape over a few hundred square kilometers, there will be patches which are drier and more open and flatter. There are other patches which are wetter, denser, and more undulating. So that's the way they would have separated. Lions favoring the drier habitats and tigers favoring the wetter habitats. So even in Kuno, Ranthambore is not very far. It's about 50, 60 kilometers as a crow flies. Occasionally a tiger comes through Kuno. I don't see a problem at all. Even if a tiger gets killed by lions or a tiger kills a few lions, that's part of the game. As I said, we cannot place too much emphasis on the fate of individuals. We have to look at persistence of populations, integrity of habitats. And luckily, even today, Kuno is largely intact, at 3,500 square kilometers of forest, and the central habitat of about 800 square kilometers of a national park. So the fact that a second population is needed is now ecologically explained, plus there is the legal position of the Supreme Court judgment, and Kuno has been identified, and it's identified in the judgment. A few tigers coming and going is from an ecological perspective or a practical perspective, it's just a matter of detail and nothing to worry about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is India the only place with overlapping tigers and lions? Yes, and snow leopards. I mean, not overlapping within the geographical territory. No other country has snow leopards and tigers, or snow leopards and lions, and definitely not all three animals. Because the other states are all north and west of us, which don't have lions and tigers, which have snow leopards.
All right. Okay. So thanks, Ravi, again, on behalf of all of us, for having taken off time for us this morning. And we'll call on you more often. I'm sure you have a lot of other things relating to wildlife and its conservation, other than just lions, to share with us. So let's wait for you to come back again and address us very soon. So thank you all for being here this morning, and meet you again soon. I think it's going to be on the second Sunday of June, if not before that. All right. So thanks again, and enjoy your day. Have a great Sunday, and one more week of
Thank
life.
you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.